I want you to imagine this. The sun has just slipped behind the hills, and in a small 19th century house, the last line of light on the floor is fading. The colors of the room dull, then disappear, until everything that is not directly kissed by fire becomes a vague shape. There is no electric lamp waiting, no switch on the wall, no standby light on a television. There is only the fire, the last candle, and the knowledge that, very en breve, the world will vanish into black. For us today, night is a minor inconvenience, something solved with the lazy press of a button. For our ancestors, in most places, for most of history, night was half of life lived at the edge of the unknown. It was not just a change in lighting, it was a change in rules, in risks, in what a human body and a human mind were allowed to do. In a cramped room, a family draws closer to the hearth. The orange glow of the fire is not romantic. It is practical. Heat, light, and safety, compressed into the same fragile spot. They crowd around it, because every step away from that glow is a step into risk. Candles made of tallow burn fast. Oil is expensive. Firewood represents hours of labor already etched into their bones. Every flame has a cost. So they gather. A shirt is mended by fingers that have, over years, learned to work almost by feel. A woman squints as the needle dips in and out of dark cloth at the very edge of the light. Next to her, someone patches a boot, the leather stiff from water and dust. If a book exists in that house, and many houses have none, it is read aloud, not because they are cultivating the habit of literature, but because it is simply efficient to spend one flame on one pair of eyes and share the words with everyone in the room. The air is thick, smoke creeps along the beams of the ceiling. Everything smells of fat, ash, wool, animals and bodies that have worked from before dawn until dusk. Eyes sting. Throats feel dry. A knocked-over candle is not a small domestic mishap, it is a threat to the entire building, to the winter's food, to the tools that keep them alive. A moment's distraction can mean losing everything to fire. So, little by little, they let the darkness win. Doors are bolted, shutters are closed, not just against the cold, but against eyes and hands that might explore a window left unlatched. The house shrinks. It feels as if it pulls itself tight around that single island of light. Beyond the walls, the night comes in waves. Cold, wind, the rustle of leaves, the distant barking of a dog, the creak of branches, the shuffle of some small animal in the yard. For us, these would be background noise. For them, each sound is a message to be interpreted. Someone stirs the coals. Someone else banks the fire for the night, burying the embers in ash, hoping they will still glow by dawn. A child fights sleep, head nodding, eyes fixed on the trembling flame, as if the candle were the world itself. In the countryside, when the last light goes out, darkness is absolute. There are no neighboring street lamps, no glow from distant motorways, no neon signs painting the clouds. There is the moon. When it is full, there are stars on clear nights, and there is nothing at all when clouds cover the sky. In the city, the picture is only a little different. Some towns have oil lamps along their main streets, or later gas lamps, creating small puddles of yellow light. But between those puddles, there are long stretches of shadow, lanes and alleys sunk into near total obscurity. Night, in that world, is not neutral. It is a frontier. Accidents live there. A stone you cannot see, a rut in the road, an unexpected step down into a shallow ditch. These things can break bones, twist ankles, and tear flesh. There are no emergency departments, no ambulances, no titanium plates waiting in sterile rooms. A broken leg might mean weeks without working. And for a laborer, weeks without working can mean the family's food supply fails. Crime lives there too. Thieves favor corners, where they cannot be recognized. A figure waiting in a doorway, a shadow pressed against a wall, can be anything from a neighbor to a danger you will never fully identify. But it would be a mistake to imagine that everyone simply laid down and slept from sunset to sunrise, that the world fell into a gentle, unbroken silence. The truth is more complicated. The truth is, there were 2 nights inside the night. Many of our ancestors did not sleep the way we do, or at least the way we claim to do, 7 or 8 hours in a single block. They knew something that modern sleep researchers would later call biphasic sleep. They expected a first sleep, then a period of wakefulness, and then a second sleep. It was not a disorder, it was the rhythm of their world. Imagine the scene. The family lies down not long after night has settled. The bodies are exhausted. Hands are rough, backs ache, feet are swollen. Within minutes, perhaps, mouths fall open in the dark, breath slow, and the house sinks into a deep, early slumber. Outside, the night thickens. The last embers under the ash give off a dull red glow. 3 hours pass, 4, and then, almost as if obeying a quiet internal bell, people begin to wake. It is not the panicked awakening of a nightmare or of an alarm clock. It is gentle. The mind rises to the surface of consciousness and finds itself in a strange, suspended time between late night and early morning. This is the watch, the vigil. Some rise from the bed, careful not to trip over sleeping bodies. They feed the fire, stirring the ashes, coaxing new flame from the orange heart of the coals. The room brightens just enough to reveal the contours of faces, beams, blankets. What do people do at this hour? Some pray. They kneel beside the bed or sit on a stool, murmuring words half-remembered in a language they barely understand, offering thanks or pleading for health, for rain, for safety. It is one of the few moments when their thoughts are not drowned out by the demands of daylight work. Some couples talk quietly, the kind of conversation that requires a slower mind and a quieter house. They speak of worries they avoided in front of children, of debts, of bad harvests, of marriages to arrange, of rumors from the next village. Sometimes they make love in this interval, not at the end of a dragging day, but in this small island of time when the body has rested once and will rest again. Others use the watch for small tasks, tending animals that need to be checked, stirring a pot left on slow heat, even stepping outside briefly to relieve themselves, eyes adjusting to the dark under an immense canopy of stars. It is a time both intimate and eerie. The village is neither fully asleep nor fully awake. If you step out then, you might hear an occasional voice, the soft clink of a bucket, the far bark of a dog, or the slow footfall of a night watchman. Above you, the sky is alive with stars in a way that people in modern cities rarely experience. Without electric light, the Milky Way is a brilliant river, the constellations sharp and insistent. After an hour or two, eyelids grow heavy again. People slip back into bed, curl against the cold, and slide into the second sleep, often deeper, sometimes filled with vivid dreams. This second sleep may last until the first gray hint of dawn touches the window. What is striking, when we look back, is that this broken sleep was not considered a problem. It was the pattern. There was no shame in waking in the middle of the night, no urgent need to fix it. The body, responding to long nights and the absence of artificial light, found its own rhythm. And while the body adapted, the mind had to contend with something else: fear. In our world, most of us have never seen true, complete darkness outside of a remote countryside, a power cut, or a forest. In their world, darkness was familiar, but that did not make it harmless. It was full of things they could not see and could not fully explain. There were the visible dangers, animals, thieves, accidents. And then there were those things that lived in stories. In many villages, Children were warned not to stray out after dark, because they might meet wandering spirits, souls of the unburied or the unjustly killed. Roads through woods or along rivers acquired reputations, each with its own tale of a ghostly figure, a strange light, a headless rider. Stories of witches gathering at crossroads, of werewolves roaming between farms, of demons perched at windows, watching for the careless. All of these circulated in a time when the line between explained and unexplained was drawn in a very different place. It is tempting for us to dismiss these tales as pure superstition, the product of ignorance. But if we look closely, we see something else as well. These stories functioned as invisible fences. They kept children inside at hours, when a fall into a well, an encounter with a stranger, or a tangle with an animal could be deadly. They discouraged young people from using the dark as a playground when the community had neither the resources nor the time to rescue them from every mistake. Fear, in other words, was also a tool. While this internal drama of sleep and fear played out inside houses, outside, another choreography unfolded. In many towns, the night had its professional guardians. The watchman walked his route, a hood or hat pulled low against the cold, a lantern in one hand, a staff in the other. He announced the hours in a loud voice, partly as a service, partly as a warning to any possible wrongdoer that he was near. He might rattle doors to check they were locked, peer at suspicious figures, shout to rouse help if he smelled smoke. But he was no modern policeman with training, backup, or radio. Often, he was an older man, poorly paid, sometimes sleepy, sometimes a little drunk himself. His authority was a mixture of presence, local knowledge, and habit. In some places, he might be feared. In others, he was a figure of jokes and songs. Still, his lantern was a moving point of reassurance for those who lay awake. Meanwhile, not everyone chose sleep. Taverns and alehouses occupied a strange position. For some, they were the noisy heart of the night, places of warmth, drink, and conversation after the harsh discipline of the day. Inside, the atmosphere was the opposite of the controlled, smoky quiet of the home. Voices rose, jokes flew, arguments eroded the boundaries of politeness. The light of oil lamps or candles reflected on mugs and rough tables. Music, sometimes scraped from a fiddle or squeezed from a simple instrument, mingled with the thud of boots. The poor laborer might spend there a precious coin, buying a brief escape from pain and exhaustion. The downside was obvious. Alcohol unchained tongues, loosened fists, fights broke out, sometimes, as far as we can tell, with alarming regularity. A broken bottle, a knife, or simply a hard fall against a stone floor could have consequences far beyond a single night. Side by side with this more public noise, there was the quieter, more secret life of the night. Lovers met in shadows, taking advantage of the fact that, in heavy darkness, the world has fewer witnesses. Ragpickers, smugglers, informal traders moved goods that were stolen, untaxed, or simply too irregular to pass through daylight markets. For them, the risk of being caught was weighed against the cover that the night provided. In large cities, especially later in the 19th century, there was also a growing world of relatively respectable nightlife. Cafes, theaters, concerts, all of them relying increasingly on improved lighting in central areas. But that was a late development, and even then, the glow rarely extended far beyond the main streets. Around that island of brightness, the old darkness still pressed close. Back in the ordinary home, survival after sunset depended on something that modern people have almost forgotten: knowing your space intimately. The typical family did not have the luxury of scattering lamps through every room. Instead, they simply did not use most of the house once the light was gone. Life shrank into the kitchen, or the main room. Bedrooms were often entered only briefly, to undress and lie down. Corridors became tunnels of black. If someone needed to move in them, they did it with a kind of slow, deliberate confidence we would probably find astonishing. Children learned to count steps, not just for fun, but as a real skill. 7 steps from the hearth to the door, 4 from the door to the top of the stair, 3 stairs down, then 2 steps to the chest. They learned where the floor sagged, where a loose stone would catch a toe, where a low beam would crack a skull if you forgot to duck. They knew that chairs belonged here, crates belonged there, tools were hung on that nail, and woe to anyone who left them elsewhere. In the dark, a misplaced object could be as dangerous as a hole in the ground. Eyes adapted too. In the modern world, we continually reset our eyes with harsh, bright light. In theirs, the fading of evening through twilight into dark was gradual. Pupils widened, and the brain learned to read subtle contrasts. The glow of embers was enough to keep someone from walking into a wall. A strip of lighter gray under a door might reveal the outside. A sliver of moon could give just enough guidance to move through a courtyard. Beyond the visual, other senses sharpened. Without the constant roar of traffic, the hum of machines, the buzz of electronics, night was relatively quiet, though not silent. That quiet made every sound more meaningful. A particular footstep on the path, the clack of a familiar latch, the creak of a known board, these were signatures, almost as individual as faces. You could tell if the person returning late was your father or your neighbor, a stranger or someone staggering with drink. You might even recognize a cart by the squeak of a wheel, a horse by the irregular clop of its hooves. Smells, too, carried. The smoke drifting from a neighbor's chimney could tell you what fuel they were burning, whether they were still awake, whether something was wrong. When I think about this, I cannot help but feel a certain admiration. We talk a great deal today about sensory overload, about how much noise and light bombard us. But there is another side, a kind of sensory dullness. We are rarely required to notice the world with such attention, to depend on our ears, our skin, our noses in quite that way. And when we are, during a sudden blackout for instance, we often feel clumsy, helpless, like a child left alone. None of this, of course, stayed frozen in time. The 19th century was precisely the period when the old night, the night ruled by flame and fear, began to change in earnest. Even before electric light entered the picture, new technologies of lighting were already reshaping evenings in wealthier towns. Oil lamps improved. Reflectors and glass chimneys made flames brighter and more stable. In some cities, gas pipes carried fuel to street lamps, which could be lit in long rows, creating avenues of flickering light, where before there had been only isolated islands. Central squares and important streets became brighter, safer, and more inviting. With that extra light came new habits. Shops stayed open later. People walked out in the evening for reasons other than necessity. A class of workers whose job existed specifically because of the night, the lamplighters, went from street to street at dusk, igniting flames that would keep burning until dawn. The presence of steady light did not abolish crime or danger, of course, but it shifted the balance. There was a sense that the night could be tamed. When electricity finally began to make its way into public spaces, and, later still, into private homes, the impact was deeper than most of us can easily imagine. A single electric bulb replaced not just the candle, but the entire ritual of tending the fire, trimming the wick, shielding the flame from wind. With a simple switch, a room could be flooded with light brighter than any ordinary candle could provide. Shadows retreated into corners. Faces lost their half-lit mystery. More importantly, time itself changed. If you can reliably light your workshop, your factory floor, your office, your classroom, the strict division between day's work and night's rest begins to erode. Work can stretch further into the evening. Social life can begin later. Entertainment can occupy hours that once belonged only to sleep or quiet. For many, this meant more opportunity, hours to read, to study, to talk, to walk without stumbling. For others, it meant the squeezing of rest. The old pattern of first and second sleep began to look inefficient, even suspicious. Employers wanted alert workers in the morning, not people who had spent a quiet hour in the night awake by the fire. Cultural expectations shifted. The normal thing became one long block of sleep, late bedtime, early rising, crammed into the demands of a society that had effectively decided to turn night into a poorly lit extension of day. There were obvious benefits: fewer house fires caused by candles and oil lamps, better chances of nighttime medical care in cities, the ability to study after dark, to travel in relative safety along lit streets. Many people felt, quite reasonably, that they were being liberated from a prison of darkness. And yet, something else was lost along the way. The deep, overwhelming darkness of a moonless night is now unknown to billions. The smooth river of the Milky Way, the kind of sky that once compelled people to tell stories of gods and monsters, is washed out by a dome of artificial glow. The shared vulnerability of families huddled around a single flame, listening to the same creaks and rustles, has been replaced by isolated pools of light in separate rooms, each person alone with their own screen. The body, too, may have lost a forgotten rhythm. We fight now with insomnia, with fatigue, with a sense that sleep is never quite satisfying. We invent terms like sleep hygiene. We build entire industries around pills, apps, and gadgets to help us do what our ancestors did, in their own way, with nothing but dark and dawn. I do not say this to romanticize the past. There is no romance in a child dying because a doctor cannot see to operate, or a family freezing because they dare not light a fire for fear of burning down their home. There is no charm in the constant worry that a careless spark will end generations of labor in one night. And yet, it is worth asking ourselves, what kind of relationship with the night have we lost? If you were transported, for just 1 week, into a 19th century village without electricity, how would you cope? The first night, perhaps, the silence would be terrifying. You would hear every creak of the house, every rustle of thatch, every scuttle under the floorboards. The darkness, once the candle is blown out, would feel almost solid, a presence rather than an absence. You might find yourself longing for the faintest LED, the smallest digital clock display. But as the days passed, your senses might begin to adjust. You would notice how twilight stretches, how the world does not flip from light to dark as suddenly as our indoor lives suggest, but slides through gentle stages. You might start to recognize the sound of particular feet on the path, the difference between wind in the trees and something heavier moving beyond the fence. You might, grudgingly, discover that waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning is not a disaster, but a strange, quiet gift, a pocket of time to think, to talk, to simply sit beside a low fire and listen to your own breath. Then, at the end of the week, someone would snap their fingers and return you to your real home. Electric lights would blaze at a touch, screens would flare to life, the hum of the refrigerator, the glow from the street, the constant, low-level noise of modernity would wrap around you like a familiar blanket. And perhaps, just perhaps, a small part of you would miss that other night. Not the cold, not the fear, not the danger, but the depth, the intimacy, the way that darkness made every sound, every flame, every human presence matter more. We do not need, of course, to give up electricity to remember that. But we can, once in a while, turn out the lights. We can step outside the circle of brightness and look up, if we are lucky enough to find a place where the stars still show through. We can sit in a darkened room and listen, really listen, to the house around us, to our own breath, to the small sounds we usually drown in light and noise. If you have ever lived through a long power cut, camped far from cities, or spent a few nights in a truly rural place, you may have felt an echo of what our ancestors took for granted: the unease, the strangeness, but also the quiet, the sense that the world becomes both larger and smaller at once. Larger because the sky and the dark stretch out without limit. Smaller because your world narrows to the circle of people and objects you can just barely see. If this kind of journey into the ordinary, difficult, ingenious lives of the past speaks to you, I would be curious to hear your story. Tell me about the last time you experienced real darkness, the kind that made you feel, for a moment, like those who lived before switches and screens. I read almost every comment. And if you find yourself wanting to explore more of these forgotten textures of everyday life, of how people really ate, slept, worked, feared, and hoped, consider staying with this channel. There are many more nights and many lost days still waiting for us.